Thank you. Welcome, everyone. This is our Lunch and Learn on climate science needs on the Mississippi River, featuring our very dear friend and friend of the river, Olivia Dorothy from American Rivers. We're delighted to be hosting this Lunch and Learn webinar as part of our third annual Mississippi River Network River Days of Action. Woo woo! From June 8th to 18th, you are joining thousands of people who are attending over 30 events organized by more than 50 organizations and community groups all across the Mississippi River watershed, both in person and online, like we are doing right now. For those of you who aren't familiar, Mississippi River Network, or MRN, we're a coalition of now nearly 70 organizations and businesses all working together to protect and care for the people, land, water, and wildlife of our greatest river, the Mississippi. Our MRN, the network implements the only public program of its kind for the river called One Mississippi. And the One Mississippi program has grown a community of over 20,000 supporters and inspired thousands of simple but meaningful actions. I bet many of you on the call today are already part of our River Citizen community. So thank you for being here, and thank you for everything that you already do to protect our river. As you may also know, every year for River Days of Action, we have a different focused, unifying policy advocacy action. Last year, it was about a geographic program for the river. We try to have the voice of the river kind of come through in various timely policy advocacy opportunities. And this year, we're focused on the Farm Bill. We're calling on Congress to protect and increase funding for vital Farm Bill conservation programs that offer smart solutions to supporting clean water and our Mississippi River communities. It's definitely time for us to do more, not less, to protect people, land, water, and wildlife. So you can learn more and take this advocacy action at the link that's on your screen here. And in just a moment, when I pass it over to Olivia, I'll also share all these links in the chat. And if you'd like to learn more about this policy advocacy action, learn more about the Farm Bill and its impacts on the river, you can attend our Lunch and Learn tomorrow, Friday. Also starting at noon Central, it's a Farm Bill webinar, and I'll link to that in a moment. All of our River Days events are at this link, onemississippi.org/River Days. There's a bunch more coming up this weekend, really fun things like farmers market up in the Twin Cities, I think, and river walks down in New Orleans. Check it out. There's another virtual event on Saturday morning. That's a guided forest bathing session with Alana Rubin of Kindred Nature. That's fabulous. If you haven't done that before, it's really great. So go to the River Days website, check out all the events that are still remaining. So again, welcome to our Lunch and Learn that's on climate science needs on the Mississippi River. We are recording, so you can revisit this and share with other colleagues and neighbors and friends later. But with that, I am going to stop sharing my screen and let Olivia take it over from here.
Awesome. Thank you, Misa, and welcome everyone. I am excited to speak with you today. Let me get my screen up and running. There we go. Awesome. All right, so before I get started, I just want to explain that this presentation was developed as part of a U.S. Geological Survey science forum on science needs on the Mississippi River. And so this presentation is structured differently because instead of highlighting any kinds of findings or answers, I'm going to be highlighting key questions that we cannot answer right now because of lack of scientific information and research. So if you're not familiar with American Rivers restores damaged rivers, protects wild rivers, and conserves clean water for people and nature. We're a national river conservation organization based in Washington, D.C., with offices around the country. I am based in northern Illinois along the Mississippi River. This is me and my family. I'm the director of our Mississippi River Restoration Program. And a fun fact about me is that every summer I take my family on a National Lampoon style family vacation to one of America's national parks. And so this was our vacation last year to Yellowstone National Park. I also want to thank the many members of the Mississippi River Network who contributed to this presentation as I developed it. Some of you are on the call right now. I know that Trevor at Friends of the Mississippi River and Matt Rhoda down at Healthy Gulf both contributed a lot of information that went into the development of this presentation. So I definitely want to recognize them. All right, so let's get started. So this, like I said, this was originally presented to the USGS Mississippi River Science Forum, and the question that they posed to me was, what are the climate science needs on the Mississippi River? And this really breaks down into two categories. And one is something that we talk about a lot, which is how will climate change impact the Mississippi River? But there is actually a second question that doesn't get nearly as much attention, and that is how does or how will the Mississippi River impact climate change? And so I'm actually going to start looking at this question. But before I do, I just want to call out that at the end of the presentation, there is going to be a QR code and a bit.ly link that is going to take you to a box folder where you can download a lot of the reference material that was used to put together this presentation. And on each slide, I just sort of
fresh compost, and then we also got to go rock shopping.
Oh, so can everybody mute themselves, please? So at the bottom of the slide, there's a little reference tag that when you go into that box folder, you'll see a set of organized folders with these that match up with these tags on the slides. All right, so this question, how does the Mississippi River contribute to climate change? And this is a very critically important question that needs to get a lot more attention to help us guide river management decisions. And basically, the key takeaway here is that we need to develop a complete carbon budget for the Mississippi River, which right now does not exist. And as part of that carbon budget, we need to start with the release of carbon in the form of carbon dioxide, methane, and other greenhouse gases that cause global warming. And there is a significant amount of oil and gas that gets extracted from the Gulf of Mexico, including areas that are in the Mississippi River distributaries. And so oil and gas activities, these are also a main driver for coastal land loss in the Mississippi River Delta. And this happens directly through the dredging of wetlands for access channels, and also indirectly by inducing subsidence and by driving climate change, which in turn causes sea level rise. Much of the extracted oil and the gas is processed in the lower Mississippi River corridor as well. And we need better science to demonstrate the local and global impacts of the petrochemical and oil and gas facilities in the Mississippi River states and in the Mississippi River floodplain. Specifically, we need to know how the petro industry is directly and indirectly fueling climate change and land loss in coastal Louisiana. Once those fossil fuels have been extracted, those fossil fuels and their byproducts are often shipped on the Mississippi River itself. The Mississippi River is a significant transportation corridor that carries 60% of U.S. grain shipments, 22% of oil and gas shipments, and 20% of coal shipments. Yet we don't have that carbon budget for the Mississippi River to understand the climate impacts of commercial barge transportation. So not only do we need to look at what is being shipped, but we also need to look at how it's being shipped. We need independently verifiable and peer-reviewed information on barge emissions by load, whether or not they're going up or downstream, by river segment, and by engine type. The EPA data on carbon emissions from barges actually relies on ocean-going vessels as well as inland river ferries, which are ships that are nothing like the tows that are moving freight up and down the Mississippi River and its tributaries. And not to mention that there is just utterly no analysis on things like methane leaks from natural gas barges, oil spills, and other types of pollution. What you see here on the screen is one peer-reviewed study that was done by back calculating the fuel taxes for the shipping industry by river segment. And so what we found when we looked at this is that, the industry produced data on carbon emissions vastly overstated the fuel economy of barges that were operating on the upper Mississippi River system, which includes the Illinois River. And so that really calls into question, where this information coming from, who's developing it, and whether or not we can see more peer-reviewed science that looks at this question more directly. And we don't just need to quantify emissions from the tows and the barges. We also need to quantify emissions from the reservoirs themselves. Unmodified rivers do not emit methane, but dammed and channelized rivers emit a lot of methane. And they actually emit a lot more methane than previously thought. And there is some really interesting peer-reviewed models that can help us calculate how much methane is being emitted from the dammed portions of the Mississippi River on the upper river reaches, as well as the leveed portions on the lower Mississippi River. And those need to be dove into in a lot more detail. And we know that the dominant Midwestern industry is the production of commodity crops, namely corn and soybean, both of which use a tremendous amount of natural resources, including chemical fertilizers and pesticides that are produced with petroleum and natural gas. Not only is our agricultural production system highly consolidated and vulnerable to disruption, which is we saw during COVID-19, but it also contributes to greenhouse gas emissions. And by some measures, it's 10% of US emissions. And so the Mississippi River Transportation Corridor facilitates the mining and export of these natural resources, including our soils, which have a tremendous capacity to sequester carbon. More diverse production systems that incorporate perennials, winter annuals, and that stack annual crops to ensure full vegetative cover on the soil surface and living plant roots below the surface for most or all of each year have a very high potential to sequester a lot of carbon. And such systems also have been shown to improve productivity while protecting the soil and other environmental benefits. And so there is a need to really shift the way we do agriculture to promote continuous living cover systems that perform better in extreme weather events that can help farmers and communities not only reduce their carbon emissions, but adapt to climate variability. And we need a lot more research to quantify those emission reduction potentials and to better understand the carbon sequestration potentials. And so to get into our second question on how will climate change impact the Mississippi River, this receives a lot more attention, and so we're able to make much more nuanced inquiries here. The major impacts of climate change along the Mississippi River include more frequent and prolonged droughts, more frequent and prolonged flood events, more extreme participation, i.e. microburst events, more days of extreme heat and bitter cold, stronger storms with more damaging impacts, more frequent and stronger hurricanes, as well as sea level rise from melting glaciers. And so how will these changes impact natural resources, water quality, human safety, and transportation on the Mississippi River? Probably the most important issues to evaluate are how and where climate change will be felt most acutely as the climate continues to change rapidly. The Mississippi River is already severely degraded due to flood control and navigation infrastructure, pollution, and invasive species. We need to know where to prioritize resources and projects, including through an analysis of where climate change impacts will be felt most acutely. Critically, we also need to look at our flood control infrastructure that was designed to protect people. The nature of floods is changing on the Mississippi River. The flood season is lengthening, and the area of flood-prone land is expanding. Most flood control infrastructure along the Mississippi River was designed for the climate of the past, with infrastructure that is designed for short-term and or sporadic use. These types of structures are at a particular risk of failure as we experience more prolonged flood events. And so there needs to be an analysis of flood control shortcomings in the context of climate change. And that needs to include an analysis of how these structures will perform under more frequent flooding and more prolonged flood events. We also need to look at who is impacted. We know that redlining deliberately placed communities of color in flood-prone areas. And we see this example on the screen is from Rockford, Illinois, including the section known as D9. In the 1920s and 30s, there was no African Americans living in this census block. However, it was redlined explicitly because Keith Creek at times overflows its banks. And so due to the formal policies and laws of the 1920s and 30s, African Americans communities were placed in these areas that were flood prone, and their communities were built with inferior materials and designs, and that was compounded with the fact that these communities flooded more frequently, and these actions deliberately depressed home values and siphoned intergenerational wealth away from communities of color and increased their exposure and vulnerability to harm from flooding. And so we need to identify these environmental justice areas along the Mississippi River to inform our flood hazard mitigation decisions and resource allocation as climate change causes more frequent and prolonged flooding. We also need scientific consensus around factors that contribute to flood risk. And this needs to be done via a National Academy of Sciences study. At the moment, we have the Corps of Engineers contending that river training structures, which are in-stream structures that scour the navigation channel, they are saying that they do not cause flooding. But many independent studies demonstrate that these structures do cause flooding. And so there is a lack of agreement among the federal agencies and independent scientists on effective river management techniques that could potentially make the river worse or better in terms of its susceptibility to climate change impacts. And this is a big issue. And as climate change causes more prolonged flood events, we also need to identify where key intervention points are located to provide the greatest flood relief for communities and people along the Mississippi River. As you can see here, this is the middle Mississippi River with Cape Girardeau, Missouri towards the bottom here, and St. Louis at the top. You can see that there's a 60% reduction in the floodplain area. And so historically, this land would have been used to store floodwaters when the Mississippi River flooded. And with that significant of a reduction, it becomes problematic because we just don't know where that river is going to go. And we need, as like I said, with more frequent flooding and more water moving through the system, we need to make space for it. And intricately tied to flooding is also the transportation of sediment. As climate change drives storm events with heavier precipitation, this will cause additional erosion and the movement of sediment in the Mississippi River. We do not have a good sediment transport model to help managers make better decisions about dredging and other types of channel maintenance activities, and this needs to be developed. As we make decisions about how to handle extreme flooding that is more likely to occur as the climate changes, we also need more information to make better management decisions for the river, including where, whether, and how to build levees and where to remove and set back levees. This decision-making is frustrated by inadequate information about the beneficial functions of floodplains. Indeed, the federal agencies cannot even decide what a floodplain is. In the most simplistic terms, floodplains are areas adjacent to ephemeral and permanent water bodies that become wet during or after precipitation events. They are also ecologically important transition zones between aquatic and terrestrial habitats. There is a need to create a comprehensive definition of a floodplain that fully identifies floodplain functions, i.e. not one that's based solely on the probability of flooding. Because floodplains not only store floodwaters, but they also provide a host of other ecosystem services that will be stressed by climate change, like storing water in natural aquifers to use during droughts. Even though floodplains account for 2% of the terrestrial landscape, they actually account for 25% of terrestrial ecosystem services. To make better decisions about how the Mississippi will be managed as the climate changes, we need to understand the value of floodplains beyond just their storing capacity for flood events. We know that climate change is also a driver of species extinction, coupled with habitat loss and destruction, invasive species, over-harvesting, and pollution. Studies show that freshwater floodplains are uniquely biodiverse places, second only to coastal wetlands in terms of biodiversity. Restoring ecologically functional floodplains may be one of the most cost-effective methods for combating the extinction crisis. Not only are freshwater species more at risk of extinction than marine or terrestrial species, but terrestrial and marine species depend on healthy floodplains. For example, a study on the Missouri River found that emergent aquatic insects commonly found in floodplains contained essential nutrients for birds that were not replaceable by terrestrial prey. Yet floodplains are totally overlooked as essential habitat for threatened, endangered, and at-risk species. There is a need to understand how floodplain loss specifically is impacting biodiversity and the extinction crisis. One of the biggest impacts of climate change is, of course, global warming. Along with global air temperatures rising, so will water temperature, which will cause many problems in the ecosystem. We know that warmer water holds less oxygen, making it easier for harmful algal blooms to form in the Mississippi River. Warmer water that is delivered to the Gulf will also increase the size of the dead zone because of increased stratification. And as climate change causes more extreme precipitation events, that rain will also carry more soil and agricultural pollution, again, increasing the size of the dead zone. Reducing soil loss and nitrogen and phosphorus pollution from farms is essential to protecting lives and economies in the Mississippi and Gulf of Mexico. Warmer water won't just cause more harmful algal blooms. Recent studies do show that warmer water temperatures make Midwestern rivers and lakes more hospitable to the invasive big-headed carp and may help them expand their range. Like invasive species, we're never quite sure what the next threat will be and how it will interact with the changing climate. Since the Clean Water Act was passed, we've learned that pollution tends to change over time as new chemicals and compounds are used in the industrial process. The Mississippi River is basically America's sewer, unfortunately, and a better understanding of emerging pollution threats is needed, especially as climate change is impacting so many facets of river health. And so how do we answer all these questions? With so many questions, as well as conflicting information between agencies, industry, and academia, the Mississippi River really needs a coordinated science center for the whole river and a regional program office within the EPA to focus on the ecosystem and the environment. As I mentioned a few times during this presentation, there is questionable science and information about the health of the river, which often gets influenced by industry-backed groups. And there's a need for more coordinated and consistent communications, especially within the federal family and the science agencies. For example, the Upper Mississippi River has the Long-Term Resource Monitoring Program, which periodically publishes a status and trends report for the Upper River. However, with every report, the USGS presents the information in a way that cannot be compared across the multiple reports. And so there is a need to standardize to help the public understand whether the ecosystem is degraded, impacted, or healthy, and how those trends are changing over time. And so we strongly encourage USGS to provide regular status updates on key parameters that utilize the format provided in Chapter 16 of the 1998 Long-Term Resources and Monitoring Report. Based on our review of all the different status and trends reports, we found the 1998-1999 status and trends report to be by far the most easy to understand and use out of all of them. We also really need more standard models as well as inputs for models. The range of models that can be used for decision making is breathtaking. And we know that the different federal agencies are using different models to make climate informed decisions. And some of those models are better than other models. And unfortunately, the general public does not understand how to review and critique models. And so they can be easily manipulated or selected to provide a favorable result, one that the agency would like to see. Errors in modeling can lead to multi-million and multi-billion-dollar mistakes during construction and bad project outcomes. And so we really want the agencies on the Mississippi River to work with the National Academy of Sciences to develop a more standardized approach to modeling that makes use of the most up-to-date and accurate data sets from agencies like NOAA and the USGS to improve accuracy and limit costly errors. If we had a centralized science center, like I mentioned before, that is controlled by the federal science agencies, i.e. USGS, EPA, and NOAA, it would really help coordinate and implement such an effort. And the last thing I'm going to say is, I don't want to end this presentation feeling like we don't know anything about the Mississippi River. The scientists who have been working on the Mississippi River are truly amazing, and we do know a lot. Even though I highlighted a lot of questions, we do actually know a lot about the Mississippi River. And so just because we don't have a centralized science agency along the Mississippi River, I don't want to say that we should be paralyzed in terms of the decision-making process. We have a lot of good information. It does take extra time to go through it, but the work that has been done on the river by the science agencies and the scientists is truly astounding. And we can and should be using that information now to help us make better decisions for the Mississippi River. And so with that, I want to say thank you for listening to the presentation. You can use this QR code. Also, you can write down this website, and this will take you to the box folder where you can download this presentation, as well as the original presentation that I did for USGS, as well as all of the supporting information and materials. And I'll leave that up for a second while I turn it back over to Misa.
Thank you, Olivia. Second time hearing that information, and yeah, but really, really good information. And I also, what I appreciate maybe the most about this presentation is the conversation about how the river impacts climate change. So thank you, Olivia, for gathering all that and for gathering all of the resources and sharing. Part of, I think, the science of these things is transparency about where we get our information from. But maybe I will open it up to see if there are any questions. And something that is on my mind, Olivia, after hearing this presentation today is just the Sackett versus EPA case that came down regarding the Clean Water Act, and which wetlands and small streams are covered. And just, as you said, you know, the need for more information and also communication about the benefits of floodplains and wetlands, especially at a time. So the Sackett case basically narrowed the scope of which wetlands would be included and protected under the Clean Water Act. And it's just, you know, obviously a huge disappointment. And we expect at least half of all of our wetlands in the US to lose protections, if not more. But yeah, just making me think, one, of what you've talked about in the sense that this case was specifically about filling in wetlands and what we know about how the benefits that wetlands provide for flood mitigation, and just leaving that open to more development in places that we know are prone to flooding. And two, that the new definitions kind of require this continuous surface connection, which ignores what we know about how climate change will make more of these places intermittent, ephemeral kind of spaces, depending on the precipitation that we know is going to change. So not really a question and not really a happy thought either, but just what is coming up for me in terms of more questions that we have. And, you know, I guess my happy thought is, we all know, I think a lot of our river citizens know, our Mississippi River Network organizations know the importance of wetlands and floodplains, and just finding more ways to connect that with everyone's everyday experience. So especially those of you who are on the call and like experience floodplains and wetlands and all of the benefits that they provide, I think that's where a lot of our organizations are moving, is to connect the actual stories of the benefits.
Yeah, the Sackett decision is going to have really big implications on along the Mississippi River and what types of development will be allowed, that we're not really sure what that's going to look like yet.
Any other questions or reflections for our speaker, Olivia Dorothy? All right. Well, Olivia, thank you so much for sharing this presentation again, and for all of the resources. Thank you all for taking the time during your lunch hour to lunch and learn with us. Again, we would love for you to take our River Days of Action virtual advocacy opportunity here. And if you would like to continue your learning journey, we have our final River Days Lunch and Learn tomorrow at the same time at noon, and that link I will share again here. And Michael, did you want to close us out?
I just flipped over to see everyone, and I did notice that Barry came off camera. Barry, did you have a question by chance for Olivia?
Nope, I just wanted to say great job. I really enjoyed it.
Thank
Fantastic.
you.
Thanks for being here, Barry. And hope to see some of you at the webinar tomorrow, or else please check out all of the events. There's still a bunch of great in-person and virtual events going through the weekend. So thanks for being here. Thanks for everything you do to protect our
You did get, I got a question in the chat.
Oh yeah, go for it.
It came directly to me, so I assume he wants to stay anonymous. To your knowledge, are there any federal agencies researching the sequestration potential in expanding, protecting the whole river's wetlands? I wish. There is, not to my knowledge, I don't think there's any federal agencies that are really researching that question at the moment. That is something that at American Rivers we have been working towards, especially as part of the federal 30 by 30 initiative, or I guess it's called now America the Beautiful initiative. And there is a goal in there to restore and protect 30% of America's freshwater by 2030 and 50% by 2050. And so that is a really important question to getting at protecting those freshwater resources. And so that is a really critical question, and I want to say thank you for asking that. Michael?
So Olivia, I do have a question. It really caught my attention when you said unmodified rivers do not emit methane. This made instant sense, but it was not something I had ever really thought about before. And I have open on the side here the package of resources and information that you use to draw these conclusions that you presented today. Where would someone learn more about these different sort of comparisons of methane or carbon emissions even across these different habitats?
Yeah, so that is a very active area of research right now. There's a really interesting model that I included links to some of the academic papers. So there is actually research that has averaged methane emissions in reservoirs across the world. And so you can actually, what it found is that there is a really strong correlation between your latitude and the amount of carbon that reservoirs emit. And so you can actually go in and calculate. So like if you have a proposed dam site or dam removal site, like you can go in and get an estimated emissions number. But there is a bigger model where you can that you really need to, and it's open source. And so if you have the modeling capability within your institution to run the model, you can do much more exact calculations that relate to things like, the land use in the watershed, as well as looking back at, historically what the river looked like pre-development. And this is something I'm actually working with Southern Illinois University to fill out that model for the entire upper Mississippi River. So to look back at pre-modification and see, based on, with the construction of the dams and the levees, just how much, what that carbon budget looks like for the upper half of the Mississippi River. And so that is a really key question. especially because of with climate change, you know, we do see a lot of new proposals for hydropower facilities, and so this new research, especially in the methane emissions, is really important because, you know, we'll be able to look more, scrutinize these proposals a little bit better to see whether or not, you know, the carbon offsets from the hydropower actually equal out with the methane emissions from the reservoir itself. So
Yeah,
that's a really important question.
I appreciate
Thanks,
that.
Michael.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and definitely have some digging to do from here, which is really exciting and appreciated. A follow-up to, you know, you mentioned about the need for a sort of like comprehensive Mississippi River science program with these different like centers at different nodes of the river,
Mm-hmm.
who are, and also highlighted and uplifted, right, that there are a lot of folks doing this great science work. You know, maybe not as connected as we really need it for something like the Mississippi River.
Mm-hmm.
Who are some of the either organizations or agencies, institutions that you look to as leaders currently in the scientific, you know, with the needs of science on the river?
Yeah, and so the best leaders for science on the river are the USGS for sure. They are producing outstanding science. I know I criticized their communications materials somewhat, but you know, that aside, like when you dig into the science behind everything, like the science there is really solid. USGS is a great source for science. We would really like to see NOAA and the EPA focus more on, you know, the entire Mississippi River and to help us, really to help USGS with their communication problem, particularly, as well as NOAA also has a lot of really great scientists that are a lot more focused on coastal areas, and we would really love to see them come inland and really help us tackle these climate change impacts on our inland river systems. So we really need their expertise. And then also the universities like Southern Illinois University, University of Minnesota, Tulane have all, like, they do wonderful science and research on the Mississippi River. And I often work with their staff, professors and researchers on trying to understand the impacts of different actions that we see on the river. And so those are really the entities that are leading this, but there is still that need to get a more coordinated science approach on the river as a whole.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you so much. It certainly takes a community, right?
Yeah.
And since we have you, I will ask one more question, and then I promise it's my last one. You know, you've been at this for a while. It's very clear, right, with the presentation today, just the depth of information that, you know, is flowing through your veins, just like the river. Right? You are part of this, right?
Yeah.
What is one of your greatest curiosities
Mm-hmm.
for where we need to go next?
Oh, my greatest curiosities are really related to that connection between, you know, the floodplain resources and biodiversity. I think that is something that I am really extremely curious about, and something that I think has really been overlooked. You know, when I am searching or looking at, you know, the threatened and endangered species, I see like species that are found in wetlands and species that are aquatic, but there's no analysis of what species are living in that aquatic terrestrial space, that transition zone. And I think that it has been a really significant oversight. And so, you know, I talked about that a little bit, but just in terms of my own personal interest, like, that is like a question that I am extremely curious about and want to explore. Other questions? I feel like this presentation, it took everyone a moment to absorb stuff that I said and come up with the questions. So anything else?
Any other questions, folks? Thanks for your questions, Michael. Yeah,
Yeah.
those were great.
I will stop the recording